Okay, welcome back. So I wanted to look a little bit more about scale. We sort of touched on it in one of the previous videos, but I'd like to talk about it a little bit more in depth and see if I can persuade you to maybe next time you're looking at a game, consider using a different scale. So the industry standard currently seems to be 28mm. It's been around a little while now. Most manufacturers are banging stuff out in that scale. It used to be 20mm, the old Airfix stuff and things like that. A lot of the historical stuff still 20mm, and I know 15mm was popular as well, but currently it seems to be 20mm. There's probably lots of reasons for that. I'm not going to look at them too much because that's kind of corporate decisions and things like that, and I know painters probably prefer it. You can get a better, well, arguably you can really concentrate on the detail on a 28mm. But let's have a look at some of the reasons you might consider changing your scale and see if I can persuade you a little bit looking at the pros and cons of stuff. So imagine you've got your standard war game. It's in 28mm and you're playing it on a 6x4 table. That's kind of standard. You'd find that at lots of games clubs, and it's kind of the way a lot of rule books are written. 28mm stuff makes great photos in rule books. That's maybe another reason they use those. So you're running on a 6x4 table. Let's drop that down to 15mm. So 15mm figures, half the size of a 28mm figure, all by 2mm. So you drop it down to 15mm. Change your inches, halve all your inches. So instead of you moving your normal 6 inches, you're only moving 3. Your figures are half the size. Your movement, your measurements are all dropped down to half the size. Suddenly, that 6x4 table becomes 12 by 8 foot table. For the same amount of room, equivalent in ground scale or equivalent in gaming terms, you're now on a battlefield that is, for all intents and purposes, 12 foot by 8 foot, without altering the mechanics of the game or anything else. But that does add another dimension to the tactics and everything else. Let's do that again. Let's drop it down again. Let's go down to 10mm or 6mm. So you're getting quite small now. There's loads of manufacturers that do these sort of micro scales, as you might call them. Instead of using inches, apologies for my cough, I know it's really probably a little bit hard to listen to. It's been hanging around for ages, but anyway. So drop it down to 10mm or 6mm. Instead of using inches, let's use centimetres. So we don't have to change anything in the rule book, we don't have to change any of the figures anywhere, we're just using centimetres instead of inches. All of a sudden, that 6x4 area that we were on becomes 15 foot by 7.5 foot. That's a massive area. So if you think you're playing, I'm going to use Napoleonics, it's probably the easiest example of mass battles. The type of tactics and the way they fought in those days needed you to have kind of big areas. But it's the same, you can argue the same for, ancient stuff. And I know that sort of some of the sci-fi stuff, you've got the epic, they're tiny little guys there because the ground scale or the type of game requires a large area. It's not really realistic to expect someone to have a 15-foot table in their house. How many of us would love to have a gaming room with a 15-foot by 7 table in it? Well, you can if you drop your scale down, so it works the other way, you see. So why would you think about using scale? There's a few reasons. There's pros and cons to everything in life, of course there is. Obviously, if you play certain games, you're kind of stuck with the miniatures that those games come with. You can't really change. If you're playing a Games Workshop game, for example, you've got to use your Games Workshop miniatures. So it can be awkward there, but there's lots of games that are minis agnostic, particularly historical stuff, but lots of other stuff as well. You got all the blue books by Osprey, they're kind of good examples of that. You can use any miniatures you like for them. So what are some of the benefits and the costs? Well, obviously buying the actual minis themselves are a lot cheaper in the smaller scales. We kind of touched on that before. For 28mm, you're looking about 20-25 quid for a sort of a 30 box of 30 miniatures, box of plastic 30 miniatures. If you're taking them into metal, you maybe get about 10-15 for your 30 quid. Transpond that 30 quid into 15mm, 10mm, 6mm. You're looking 10mm, you probably get about 30 10mm miniatures for about 5 or 6 quid. 6mm, you're probably getting 40-50 odd miniatures for 5 or 6 quid. So the prices, you know, you're getting so much more for your money. Basing wise, it's kind of, you can still, believe it or not, people still base them individually. There's a really cool guy, you might have seen him on the Meeples and Miniatures, Pear his name is. He's got a blog site called Roller One. If you look on there, he does a lot of 6mm gaming. He's based a lot of his stuff on single bases. 10mm, you can certainly do them on single bases. I've got some 10mm stuff coming. I managed to get a load of bases off of eBay the other day. These are all 10mm bases, so they're centimetre square basically. And I'm going to attempt to base them individually. I've already started doing it, so once they come along I'll show you them anyway at another point. So you certainly can do them individually to play your skirmish games. Painting in theory is faster. It's a different technique, one you probably need to practice, or one you can look up. There's loads of tips and bits and bobs on the internet, as I said. Painting's quicker. You can bash out a unit of smaller scale stuff a lot faster than you can the bigger stuff. So storage, you can fit a whole army on quite a small shelf space in the same way the tables scale, the storage scales. So you need a lot less room. There are going to be cons to it, I'm not going to lie, I'm not sitting here going do it, it's a no-brainer. It's not a no-brainer, there are disadvantages to it. There's less detail. If painting is a big aspect of the game for you, perhaps you won't enjoy the little miniatures quite so much because there's less detail. But I would urge you to have a look at places like Alder for the 6mm stuff, Pendragon, Carista. There's loads of different manufacturers that make these micro scales. Just Google some and have a look at some images and you'll be surprised how detailed you can get. But more than that, when you actually look at them in the mass, big groups of them, because you don't see big groups of 28mm unless you've watched a great game at Glasgow. You don't see big groups of 28mm because it takes so long to do and whatever, and the amount of room you need. So there is an element of the wonder of seeing a massed kind of block of soldiers. So you can argue there's less detail. You can argue they're fiddly, there's no doubt about it, they're a lot smaller. There's ways around it. A lot of people glue them to lolly sticks to help paint them, things like that. If you're getting old like I am, maybe your eyes are starting to go, so that might be an issue for you. You might be concerned about your eyesight for painting them in bits and pieces. They're genuine concerns and they're genuine probably downsides to smaller scales. Think of the type of games you like playing. If you're going to play a skirmish game, perhaps, you know, say for example Test of Honour's done on a 3x3, that's not really a space issue. One of the biggest advantages of playing the smaller scales is being able to have grand battles. If you're not into grand battle games anyway, then it's kind of like, you could argue that it's not really an issue. But if grand battles are something you've wanted to have a look at, or perhaps you don't play them because you just never get around to painting or didn't have the room, then perhaps you could consider it. So the type of game is important. As I said though, this Roller One website, if you look on there, the guy, this pair fellow on there, he plays Sharp Practice in 6mm, individually based, works a treat, and you can play it, well, we'll come to that, we can play that on a tiny little board. I mean, if you're looking at 6mm, to make a 6x4 board, scaled down into 6mm, it's 28 inches by 19 inches. So just think about that for a second. 28 inches, I'll take this here. 28 inches, boom. It's 28 inches. So that's the equivalent of 6 foot if you're knocking it down into centimetres. It's a tiny little area. You can play it on your coffee table. You know, you can play it on your table downstairs. Perhaps when your kids come round, or you know, take it on holiday with you, stick it in your caravan, do whatever. You know what I mean? It's tiny. So you've got the ground scale. Some people complain about ground scaling games, saying that, oh, it's not very realistic, that they can only fire 12 inches, a machine gun could fire much further than that. Well, you can start playing with the ranges of stuff. There's nothing to stop you keeping your 6'4" table that you would normally play your big games on, using 15mm figures or 10mm figures or 6mm figures, but keeping the ranges in inches. Then all of a sudden, everyone can fire a lot further. And that alters the dynamics of the game. People moving further, firing further, and everything else. Perhaps that would help with your immersion, that the machine guns and whatever can actually have a bit more of a range on them And so that's kind of what I wanted to talk about. That I brought it up because, like I say, I've ordered a load of 10mm stuff. I'm going to be using Rebels and Patriots, which there's a review on here somewhere about Rebels and Patriots that I did. That's minis agnostic. I'm going to do it with Napoleonics instead of concentrating on the various American wars, purely because I like the look of the uniforms, and you know, some of the guys at the club have got some 10mm minis, so hopefully we can get together and play them. I'm going to base them up for Rebels and Patriots, but I'm going to have a crack at playing sharp practice with them as well, and perhaps also black powder. So that's kind of what's on the forefront of my mind, and I thought I'd share some of the thoughts with you. Have a look at the Meeples and Miniatures podcast about 6mm gaming, the wonder of 6. Have a look on Roller One website and see some pictures. Just, you know, have a look on the computer and see what you think. Anyway, I bored you enough with that. So if you like these videos, subscribe, and we'll sit Facebook and tell you if I make some more. And that's about it. So see you again. Ta-da. Take care. Bye bye.